Okay, today we're going to have a look at the Greek gods. This is our first chapter, the first half of the first chapter, in our classics course, and it's all about trying to understand the pantheon of Greek gods, the family who live on Olympus. We're going to look at the main gods today, not all of the thousands of gods that the Greeks had, but the main ones. We're going to look at a lot of key words, most of them taken from the textbook, but others too, and we're going to try and understand what a god is in Greece as well. So, without further ado, here we go. Now we're going to start here with some key words. Our first one, hiera, which means the holy affairs. Now this is a Greek word. The Greeks didn't have a word like we do, religion, to sort of represent a set of beliefs and actions and moral codes and things. Instead, they had this idea of hiera, holy affairs, things pertaining to the gods and goddesses. Now, the Greeks were polytheist, which means they practiced a form of polytheism. Polytheism means that you believe in more than one god. Of course, this would be kind of boring if there was only one. They have a family instead. Now, we still see polytheism in the world today. Religions like Hinduism are polytheistic. But in the West, most religions are now the opposite of polytheism. They are monotheism or monotheistic, which means there's only one god. So if we think of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they are monotheistic. That's the opposite. Our next word is anthropomorphism. Ooh, nice long word there. This word means giving non-human things human characteristics. So this is what we see with the Greek gods and the Roman gods later. You take an idea, a concept, maybe love, and you give it a human form. In this case, it would be Aphrodite for love. Maybe the concept is justice, and then you give that a human form in the form of Zeus, or even death, given a human form as Hades, or the ocean, given human form as Poseidon. So anthropomorphism is something that you're probably quite familiar with, even if you don't know the name. A lot of children's stories are based around anthropomorphism. You know, anthropomorphic animals going around acting like people, talking, doing stuff. Think Beauty and the Beast with anthropomorphic cutlery. Yeah, that weird French kettle and stuff. All of that fits under anthropomorphism, and that's a really important concept for our Greek gods. It's important because without anthropomorphism, maybe the people, the worshippers, the people following the hiera, the holy affairs, wouldn't have been able to relate so well to the gods. Often by giving something a human face, you know, in this case literally, that helps us sort of connect with them better. We can start telling stories about them where the characters interact and do things. It would be difficult to do a story about, I don't know, the concept of love mingling with the concept of justice. I mean, it would be tricky. But having two characters, one that represents love and one that represents justice, interacting suddenly makes it much easier. Now, our next key word here is epithets. And these are adjectives that we add to a name, usually the name of a god, but it can be the name of heroes too, to describe it in more detail. So we'll see these as we go through the course quite a lot. We can have, we'll look in particular at Athena's epithets. So you've got Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin. You've got Athena Nike, Athena of Victory. You've got Athena Polis, Athena of the City. And it's always Athena. We're always talking about the same goddess. But those different epithets added to her name give us different ideas about her character. So in her Nike aspect, she might behave differently from her Parthenos aspect. And of course, The Parthenon, which is one of the temples that we study, is based on an epithet of Athena. Athena the Virgin, Parthenos, Parthenon. You see how it goes. We'll also see that a lot when we come to our literary sources, in particular when we look at the story of Demeter and Persephone in the next video. You'll notice that Demeter, Persephone, Zeus, Hades, they always have epithets put before their name to show us a little bit more about their character. Now our next keyword is a pantheon. The pantheon is the name of the family of gods. Maybe not strictly a family, because some pantheons, they're not directly related, but it's a good way of thinking about it. A group, a set, a herd, whatever you want to go for, of gods is a pantheon. And so that goes hand in hand with polytheism, of course. You couldn't have a pantheon in a monotheistic religion, because it would be a family of one. The last word here is iconography. Now, iconography helps us understand who various gods and goddesses are based on the things that they are associated with, the logos, the symbols that go with them. And this is really important with ancient Greek stuff, because we don't get on friezes or with statues or murals, we don't get speech bubbles or little plaques that say who the characters are. We'll get a picture of a woman or a man, and the only way often that we can tell who those women or men are, those gods or goddesses or heroes, are by what they're carrying, what they are associated with, what's next to them. Sometimes iconography can be an object. So often we can tell Zeus is Zeus because he holds a thunderbolt, a lightning bolt. Here we are. So you might see a man with a beard. It would be really hard to tell who that is. But then you see him holding a thunderbolt, and suddenly, aha, that's Zeus. You might see another man with a beard who looks almost identical, and you wouldn't be able to tell, well, who this man is, but he might be holding the cornucopia. Now, the cornucopia is a horn, in some versions of mythology, taken from the river god Aeolus. But this horn is filled with food and nice things. It's also called the horn of plenty, and it's supposed to never run out. And in Greek mythology, that cornucopia is most often held by Hades, the lord of the underworld. And so if you see a man with a beard with a lightning bolt, we can say, ah, that's Zeus. If we can see a man that looks identical holding the cornucopia, we can say that's Hades. And if we see a man who again is almost identical but is holding a trident, well then that must be Poseidon, the god of the sea. Three men, or gods, who look very, very similar, sort of facially and clothing-wise, so we tell them apart with their iconography. And as we look at the different gods today and goddesses, we'll mention their common iconography so that you can identify them in our sources. So let's take a look at the Greek pantheon here. Ooh, try and fit that on. So we've got a few gods and goddesses that we're going to start with here who are, well, not quite gods and goddesses, I suppose. Our first four, if I put a box around those, we've got Uranus and Gaia, the sky and the earth, and they are the parents of, they're often called primordial forces or sometimes titans, or to be confusing, sometimes gods. And then we've got Kronos and Rhea. Kronos, who in Rome represents Saturn, and Rhea, his wife. Now these two are important. Again, they are titans, and they are the parents of the gods, the main family of gods, in particular the 6 original Olympian gods. So we have these we don't need to know too much about. We don't really need to understand their iconography. Just a quick note though, that the difference between titans and gods, in later mythology, we often have an idea of, this is a titan, this is a god. In earlier mythology, when we look at our earlier sources from people like Homer, we get this idea that Titan and God can be quite interchangeable. Homer talks about characters like Helios as gods, whereas maybe in later mythology we talk about him as a Titan. So don't get too hung up on what a god or a Titan is. As long as we understand the main gods, we're all good. Okay? So let's start with those first 6 here. Oh, is that still going? Oh, yeah. Let's start with our first 6. So we've got Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, the 3 male leaders of the gods, 3 brothers. The myth goes that Kronos, after hearing a prophecy that his children would mess him up, ate his children. He ate Hera and Poseidon and Hestia and Hades and Demeter. And he was about to eat Zeus too, but Rhea, his wife, tricked him into eating a boulder or a rock instead, and he ended up, instead of eating Zeus, vomiting up all these children, who became the gods and did indeed go along and end up killing him, or at least defeating him and the Titans and taking over the universe. So the 3 boys, Zeus, Poseidon and Hades, they sort of come in levels of power. There are various stories about, or myths, about how they became the gods of what they did. In probably the most famous, they draw straws, they take lots, they have a little bet to see randomly who is going to be the god of which realm. Now Hades is supposed to be the weakest of the 3. He was born first, which means he's the weakest. I don't know how that works, but that's the way it does work. Poseidon being the second strongest and Zeus being the strongest. So Hades pulled the short straw and has to live in the underworld and be the god of that area. It's an important job. Someone has to do it. In some later mythologies, like if we talk modern mythology, think of the Hercules Disney film and stuff, Hades is shown as an evil character. But he's not. We shouldn't confuse him with evil. He has a job to do, and he does it well. We have Poseidon then, who got given the oceans, the seas, but is also the god of horses and earthquakes. Yeah, amongst other things. Poseidon is often also the father of monsters. People like Polyphemus the Cyclops that we'll see in the future. And then Zeus, he's the leader, the most powerful, pulled the longest straw, however you want to look at it. Zeus is god of, most famously, thunder and lightning, but that's a bit lame really when you think about it. The real importance of Zeus is that he is the god of oaths and promises, contracts and justice, which are far more important concepts, I suppose, than thunder and lightning in the grand scheme of things. He's also most definitely the leader of the gods. He is the king of the gods. And he is married to Hera. Now, between them, Zeus and Hera had a fair few children, although most of them are not Hera's. We've got Zeus here, who has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 important gods stemming from him. And then we have Zeus and Hera, and for some reason I've lost a line here. Together, they parent only 2 other gods. Now that tells us straight away that although Zeus is the god of justice, he doesn't really care about fidelity. Yeah, sticking with his wife. He's having lots of affairs with lots of women, mostly goddesses, but often mortals too, and that means that he ends up having more children to his own name than he and Hera do together. So, iconography. With Zeus, we have the thunderbolt, the lightning bolt. With Poseidon, we often have the trident, but sort of watery, fishy or horsey themes are often quite clear as well. And with Hades, we have that cornucopia that we mentioned earlier. That looks strangely like a deformed mouse, but trust me, it's a cornucopia. We'll put some corn coming out. Now, we also have 3 goddesses in this first rank. We have Hera. She is the goddess of family, and she's related to the ideas like childhood, child rearing, and also this idea of fidelity, being honest and honourable to your married partner, which of course is highly ironic because she's married to Zeus, who is the least faithful god in the whole universe. So yeah, it's not a great mix there. Then we've got Hestia, who is the goddess of mysteries. She is connected with the Eleusinian mysteries, which we'll look at later. And she is also represented with the hearth, with the home, with the warming fire. So often her iconography is flame. We also see her as depicted often wearing a veil. So her face is obscured to represent that mystery. This is a flame here. You can tell I'm not great at drawing. Hera, on the other hand, is often shown by wearing a diadem, so a little crown. And a later iconography also includes peacock feathers, the eye of Hera coming from her, so she's watching down on everyone. We then have Demeter. She is associated with agriculture and growing things. So she's often shown holding a sheaf of wheat or corn or something like that to show that she is the goddess of farming and fertility. Fertility being reproduction amongst humans and animals and plants in her case. So there we are. Together, those 6 are the most important gods and goddesses on Mount Olympus. But there are others that we need to know about. So let's have a look at Zeus's children. So Zeus, first of all, in a strange twist of mythology, Zeus actually gives birth to the first of these through his head. That's Athena. Now, we're going to talk about Athena a lot in this course because she is associated with Athens, and a lot of our Greek study centres around the city of Athens in the 5th century BC, the building of the Parthenon and the dedication to Athena. So we'll be very familiar with her. She's the goddess of warfare and wisdom. The kind of warfare that is involved with wisdom, tactics, strategy, that kind of thing. She's also seen as a protector of the Greeks, especially the Athenians. And so her iconography is quite militaristic. She'll have a spear. She'll often have a shield, which is called the Aegis. The Aegis is the particular name, and often that shield has the face of Medusa in it. Frightening. Or also, her other iconography could well be an owl. I really cannot draw owls, but a cute little owl would be her iconography too. And that's part of the reason why today we think of owls as being wise, although in nature they're honestly no more intelligent than any other bird as far as I can tell. So Athena's really important. She pops up in a lot of the myths that we're going to look at, and her iconography is usually quite straightforward. Our next 2 are a pair of twins. We have Apollo, the sun god. Apollo is kind of a god of lots of things throughout the history of Greece. He is the god of music. He is the god of medicine. Those 2 are particularly important. But also the sun and other things too. His iconography is often based around the sun, as you could imagine. And there is also a way of telling Apollo apart from the other gods in that Apollo is usually shown as a young man. Apollo and Artemis, his twin sister, they don't age. So whereas Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, they all have big long beards, Apollo is usually seen as a very young man, like a late teenager, early 20s, something like that. Now his sister Artemis, if he's associated with the sun, she's associated with the moon. And she's also associated with hunting. So a bow and arrow is something that we often see with her, or a wild animal. So most famously and most common maybe, a stag. Trust me, that's a stag. So together, Apollo and Artemis, they often pop up in mythology, connected. They look after each other. They have a deep connection because they are twins. Now, our next one is Dionysus. Dionysus is the god of wine, theatre, madness, memory, and the mind, amongst other things. Dionysus has a whole range of different iconography, which we'll see, but often grapes is important because, of course, the grapes create wine. Snakes tend to pop up a lot with Dionysus, as do leopards. I'm not even going to try and draw a leopard. And there's more iconography too. In terms of physical appearance, Dionysus in the myths is supposed to have come from India, or at least spent a lot of time in India. He's another strange one, is Dionysus, who was born from Zeus's thigh. If Athena popped out of his head, Dionysus popped out of his thigh. Excuse me. And so, yeah, because he's often shown from India, he has the traditional hair of the Indian sadhus, the holy men who still roam India today, and that's dreadlocks. So if you see a god with lots of grapes or some dreadlocks going on, that'll be Dionysus. We then have Hermes, who is the messenger god, and he's identified by a few things. He often has a travelling stick called a caduceus, a stick that often has a snake wrapped around it. He has sandals, or a hat, or sometimes both, with wings on, because he represents communication, trade, information, speed, delivery of messages. We see him a lot in our mythology because he plays a role of often coming down and talking to our main characters like Odysseus, giving them information from the gods. Now, Hermes and Dionysus are both quite special because most gods cannot go to the underworld, with the exception of Hades, the king of the underworld. Zeus, for instance, couldn't go down to the underworld, wouldn't be allowed. But Dionysus and Hermes both can. Hermes can because he's the messenger. He can, go wherever he wants to deliver his messages. And Dionysus can because once he was mortal and he died. And so he has been to the underworld before being snatched back again and created into a god. So he can pass through that veil of life and death quite freely, which is good for him, I suppose. Now, the children of both Zeus and Hera here, we have Hephaestus and we have Ares. Hephaestus is the smith. He works with fire, he works with metal, he creates things, and he's often associated, especially in Roman religion, with volcanoes. So when we see Hephaestus, we often see his tools, a hammer and maybe some tongs, the tools that a blacksmith would use. Now physically, Hephaestus is supposed to be particularly ugly. He's disgusting. He walks with a limp because he had an early injury as a young man, young god, and he's supposed to be hideous, which is brilliant because he's married to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, love, and the most attractive of goddesses, which is a nice sort of comedy thing there, I suppose. We then have Ares, who is the god of war. Now Ares' iconography is quite difficult because he often doesn't have particular objects with him. The way we can usually tell it's Ares is that he will wear a helmet, often with a plume coming out the back, and he'll hold weaponry. But other than that, he'll often be topless, rippling missiles? No, not missiles. Rippling muscles, and he'll look really, severe and strong. So Ares is the war aspect that Athena is not. If Athena is the cunning, tactical, maybe even gentlemanly kind of warfare, Ares is the kind of warfare where you froth at the mouth and beat your enemies to death with a very sharp object. That's Ares, the battle lust, the anger, the rage, the charge, the clatter of weapons against armor. That's Ares. Okay, next and finally, we have Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty, but she's a right old troublemaker most of the time. And she has, she's a bit different because she doesn't come with the other gods from Kronos and Rhea now. She comes directly from Uranus. Now, Aphrodite's iconography is often seen as different animals. So it could be a dolphin is associated with Aphrodite. Yeah, that's a dolphin. Often birds are associated with Aphrodite, especially doves and swans, sort of white birds. Another way that we can identify her is by her children. So she'll have Cupid, Panic, Phobos. Her children, they look like fat little babies with wings. And so, sorry, I should have said Eros instead of Cupid because this is Greece. So if you see a woman with flying babies around her, that could well be Aphrodite. If you see her with dolphins, with swans, could be Aphrodite. Another way that we see her, especially in sort of later depictions, more like the Romans than the early Greeks, is just nudity. If she's completely naked, that's Aphrodite, usually. Yeah, it's a good sign. All right, so those are our main gods and goddesses, and we will come to them all in more detail in the future. But let's have a look at some of the key words that go with these gods and goddesses that the syllabus highlights for us to know. So we're starting here, and I think we've mentioned most of these already today, but it's good to get them in a row. So first up, we've got our Titans, the parents of the gods. Like I said, sometimes it's hard to tell who's a Titan and who's a god, because Greek mythology isn't fixed. You may well know versions of myths that we'll go through in this course that you know differently, which is fine. There is no Bible of myths, so to speak, no written certain truth of the myths. They come to us over hundreds, if not thousands of years, depending on how far back some of these go. And they are told and retold, written by different authors. Some of them we get through to us coming from the Romans. Some of them we have earlier versions of. And even at the time, there were no agreed versions of the myths. So just bear that in mind. If we ever do tell a myth and you're like, hang on, I know the different version, you're not wrong. But neither is my version. Yeah. So the best way to think about it in terms of the exam is to try and stick with the prescribed myths that they give us. So, for instance, they will give us the Homeric hymn to Demeter, which gives the story of Persephone and Hades. And so, if we're talking about that in the exam, go with the version they've given us. Don't go off piste and talk about a later version that you know about. But if there's myths that are not part of the syllabus that you want to mention, which you are free to, then you can go with any version you like. It's cool. So, Titans, parents of the gods. Our next word is chthonic, which is related to the underworld. So we talk about Hades as a chthonic god, for he is a god of the underworld. Persephone, his wife, is chthonic. She is the goddess of the underworld. Our next word is cornucopia. That's the horn of plenty, and that's often seen with Hades, that chthonic god. We've got the diadem, a small crown. We said that goes with Hera. Hera's a tricky one to identify because of her iconography, because unfortunately often other goddesses are shown with diadems too. So yeah, usually the best way to identify Hera from a source is if there's a goddess and she's got nothing special going on, she's just wearing a diadem, and there's no swans for Aphrodite or flames for Hestia, then go for her. It's not a perfect system, but it does tend to work. Our next one here is the Aegis. We talked about that. That's the shield of Athena with the face of Medusa on it. The shield that can prevent all damage. It's a pretty good magic item there. Then we've got the Acropolis, which we'll come to again in the future, but for some reason they put it in this section of the textbook too. That's the highest point of Athens, the sanctuary, the area where the temples are positioned, and that's where we'll find the Parthenon. More on that in the future when we get to the Parthenon. Our next one is the oracle, or an oracle. So an oracle kind of has two meanings. Back in Greek times, we would talk about an oracle as a prophecy. So, it will rain on Tuesday would have been an oracle, that utterance. But we can also use the word oracle to be the person who gives the prophecy. So we might go to the Oracle of Delphi to get an oracle about the weather next Tuesday. So the Oracle of Delphi might give us the oracle that it will rain next Tuesday. You see, we can use it both ways. We've then got the caduceus. That's the travelling stick held by Hermes, often with snakes wrapped around it. We've got a lyre, which is a musical instrument, a little like a harp. That will often come up with the iconography of Apollo, but it could also represent heroes like Orpheus. We've got the thyrsus, which is a similar thing to a caduceus, but they are different, so we need to know the different names there. The thyrsus is associated with Dionysus, and it's a staff with a pine cone on the end. Now I've got a picture here that brings in a lot of Dionysian iconography, and we can just see the caduceus coming out here. Sorry, not caduceus, the thyrsus, and this Menaiad here is holding a thyrsus too. So these are the symbols of Dionysus. The pine cone kind of represents the mind. Some people think that it has a direct reference to the pineal gland, which is part of the brain, which is shaped like a pine cone. Exactly how much the Greeks knew about the makeup of the brain, though, is unsure. But it is interesting that Dionysus is linked with the mind and memory, and our minds and memories are linked with a pine cone-shaped part of our brains. There we go. We then have the Maenads, or the Maenads. These are the female followers of Dionysus, and they're often portrayed as quite mad, running around naked, ripping men apart with their bare hands, reveling, throwing snakes around. They're party-loving, dangerous characters who get swept up in the mind games of Dionysus, and their male counterparts are satyrs, or satyrs? I don't know. Different pronunciations. But these are creatures that are part goat, part man, and they roam around. They often have little horns, little beards, goat legs, and they hang out with the Maenads, and dance around, get drunk, general raucous behaviour, all that kind of stuff. And our final word here, or keyword, is the Eleusinian mysteries. These are the secret mysteries associated with Hestia. Now that's the way that our course gives it, that Hestia is the queen of the Eleusinian mysteries. Just to say that we don't really know many details about those mysteries, because even in times of the Greeks, they were mysterious, they were secret. So how would we know much about them? A secret thing being a secret thing. Also, though, those mysteries are often associated with Dionysus too. So it's not just Hestia, but the way our textbook presents it is that Hestia is the main one there. Just be aware when we're going a bit deeper, Dionysus and other gods and goddesses can also be associated with those mysteries, that mystery cult. Alright, so that's our key information about the Greek gods. And if you've got any sort of questions in your head, thinking, well, hang on, how do these gods interact or whatever, we go into that quite a lot. We will, throughout this course, go into different myths and legends that feature the gods in different ways, and by doing that, we will build up an understanding of their character and their abilities and the stories associated with them. We're going to end this recording here with a quick little quiz. I've got 6 gods and goddesses here, and based on their iconography, I wonder if you can tell who they are. Now, in the exam, there are often questions, usually the very first question, which will give you a source, and it will say, who is the figure in this source? How can you tell? And you get 2 marks for this. You get 1 mark for giving the accurate god or goddess, so getting the name right, and then you get a secondary mark for saying how you can tell, which is usually based on the iconography. Now, if you only give the name of the god and you don't explain why you know it's that god, you can only get 1 mark out of the 2. Likewise, if you say, this god is here, has bows and arrows, but don't tell the name, then you're not going to get any marks for that because your iconography doesn't link to anything. Not great. So I'll zoom in on these a little bit and we'll see if you can get them. So there's A and B there. We have a goddess and a god. Now, in our exam, they wouldn't use sort of modern sources like this. They would always use ancient ones. But just for this exercise, I think using some modern sources is fine. Here we have C here, our goddess. Down here we have D, another goddess with an owl there. Here we have E. This is the kind of source that we might actually get in our exam. I'll zoom in on that one because the detail is important. We have a god here and a goddess, but I'm mostly interested in the god today. And then we've got F there, a statue of another god. So have a little think about what they are, and I'll give you the answers after a pause. If you pause this, that's how that'll work, isn't it? I'll give the answers in a second. I'm assuming you're done. All right. So A here, we've got Artemis. We can tell because she's with a wild animal and she's got her bows and arrows. There we are. B, we have Hermes. We can tell he's got wings on his sandals and he's got his travelling stick, his caduceus. No snake on it here, but we do have the wings, so that works. C is Hestia. She's wearing the veil. It's not over her face, but she's got it there, and she's holding the flame of the hearth. D is Athena. We can tell she's got her spear, she's got her war helmet, and she's also got her little owl there as well. Now E, we have Hades. We can tell because he's holding his cornucopia. It's not very detailed, still better than my drawings, but that's pretty much the only reason we can tell. Now with him here is Persephone, his wife, who wasn't one of our main gods or goddesses, but we can tell it's Persephone, number one because she's with Hades, and number two because she's holding a pomegranate seed. That'll make more sense after the next recording. And then we've got F here. F is Ares, the god of war. There he is with his muscles and his helmet. All right, so thanks very much, guys. Hopefully that made sense, and next recording will be all about the Roman side of this. We're going to meet the same characters again, but most of their names are going to change, and some of their iconography and symbolism too. So thank you very much. I'll see you soon.